So whenever there are major rezonings, there's major emotions riding around a community, and the Bowral South project is probably one of the topics that's elicited a lot of emotion in the district. And I'd just like to go through a little bit of the history, because it's very hard for individuals to make decisions about the future and how you're going to address this without knowing the background and what's possible and what's not possible. So the key issue is to develop or not develop South Bowral. That's the first part I'd like to deal with tonight, and then put that behind us because there may be some bad news here for you. The key driver in development at the moment is the state government's response to the housing crisis. And we do have a serious housing crisis. I've been in the industry for almost 60 years, and I think there's a bigger housing crisis now than I've experienced in my lifetime. So the state government has responded. It's now a major political issue at state government level, and the state government is responding. They're setting growth targets for every local government in New South Wales, and for the Wingecarribee Shire they've set now 9,000 houses in the next 20 years. And the other propeller that's driving government is the requirement for more diverse housing choice than there is at the moment. So new housing is developed in two ways. Firstly, infill. This has been a major target for government and local government to try and get more houses in established areas. And targets have been set, but they've notoriously underperformed. It's very hard to get people to want to sell their home or put another house in their backyard or join with one or two neighbours to accumulate a larger site that might be suitable for medium density. So what I've seen in the last 20 years, infill targets have not been met. The other alternative is Greenfield development. That's the incremental growth on the edge of town in the conventional sprawl model that we see, car dependent, and just another 50 or 100 or 200 blocks on the edge of town. Let's look at the history about Bowral South. About 4 to 5 years ago, I believe, the council initiated, with the promptings of the state government, the Department of Planning, to establish a growth housing strategy for the Shire. They engaged consultants and went through their processes, and in the end they identified a range of areas, and Bowral South was one of those. They had to have proximity to services, or able to be serviced. There was transport infrastructure and a few other basics. So Bowral South was one of the areas identified. Once council signed off on that, it goes to the Department of Planning for endorsement. Once it's endorsed, that enables the state government then to provide grants for further planning and strategic planning, and it also provides a framework for them to provide grants for upgrading of infrastructure as necessary. So that's the system that we're dealing with. That plan, I understand, was adopted 3 or 4 years ago by a former council. It's most important for the public to understand that all planning authority rests with the state government. And planning legislation is dealt with Parliament, and planning regulations is under the full authority of the Planning Minister. And local government get their authority by delegation from the Minister, and the Minister can withdraw that authority or override councils at any time. Before I go a little bit further on that, I want to talk about this broad issue. If it is to be developed, what sort of development do we want? I want to talk about the Sprawl Model, started in the late 50s, I think, in the US, seriously. And we absorbed all of those standards, and we're still rolling that out now. It's car dependent for every need. There's large freestanding homes and very little in the way of housing diversity. And we see that happening everywhere. And as a friend of mine said the other day, have you seen that misery that's spreading down the highway as you come out of Sydney? And that's how the public feel about this. And one of the key concerns that the public have is that if there's going to be any growth, it's going to be more of that, and so we're opposed to it. And I find that as a very common response. Planning Environment Law came in '79, and since that time there have been add-ons, 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 relentless add-ons. And we now have a situation where it's just almost impossible to navigate your way through. And the poor mum and dads who want to do an addition to their home, they give up in frustration. Everyone wants to blame the local council, but I put the blame squarely on the complexity of our planning system. So if we do nothing as a community with all this maze of regulation, what we're going to get is more car-dependent sprawl, and that is my key concern. The reason I'm here is because I don't want this to happen, and there are alternatives. Now, Professor Leslie Stein, planning law at Sydney University, or adjunct professor now, he studied planning in 80 jurisdictions around the world: North, South America, Europe, Southeast Asia, Australasia. And then he ranked them according to their effectiveness and efficiency and whether they served the public interest. He ranked New South Wales last out of 80, the worst in the world. And the question is why? It's because of its absolute complexity. So it's almost as though the 1979 regulations have reached their use-by date. And I understand from what I'm hearing at a high level in government that there are new regulations coming soon that's going to deal with this complexity in some way. The response in the past has been to take authority away from council and put planning panels in and others to deal with these things. So one of the things that happens with complexity is it destroys ability to be innovative. The complex rules are just a challenge. Even experienced developers are leaving the industry because of the complexity of their planning system. Developers are now saying that planning risk is 70% of total project risk. The other 30% is risk related to finance, marketing and construction. It used to be 10% when I was a lad, but it's about 70% now, and it's such a crisis. And I don't think it's serving the community well, certainly not serving the industry well, and it's not delivering the outcomes that we would all want. There's so many issues to deal with that the regulators are compliance focused. And the best way for a developer to get through the system is comply with the regulations. Even though the law is supposed to be, requires everyone to deal with each project on merit, what actually happens is you tick the boxes, and so the developers line up, tick the boxes, and the net effect at the end of this is conventional development. So innovation is totally stifled with the current system. And all these houses you see there all comply. It's the easiest way to get through the system is to do more of this. Unfortunately, that's the bad news I'm bringing this evening. This is the problem that we have. So, the way ahead for us. What are the choices? I'm of the view that with what's gone on to date, with the housing strategy, the funding that the state government's made available already for the development of master plans, the commitment to upgrading the Bowral sewer plant, which will have the capacity to serve South Bowral. If you ask me what are the chances of stopping South Bowral, I'd say, I'd be generous if I'd say, I think it's over, I have to tell you. There'll be a lot of refinements about which parts of that site get developed, but the idea of the public rising up, committing council to vote against it, the council will not be able to stop it at this point in time. I want to be very clear on that. Last year, I think down in Kiama, housing strategy land, South Kiama, developer took control of the land, made application for rezoning, 800 objectors, swamped councillors, council voted against their own housing strategy. Within 3 months it was zoned by the state government. If it's on a housing strategy, the chances of it being developed are 99.9%, especially in the housing crisis that we have at the moment. So the real question to me is, we can do nothing and create a big stir, and in that are we stifling creativity and innovation, and we're going to get more sprawl, and that's my biggest single concern that I have. Walkable communities with a focus on a township. We haven't built a new quality township in Australia, I'm told by one of the leading urban designers in Australia, for 100 years. We've built bits and pieces of them, but we haven't built a new town. And so this is an opportunity for us. They used to do it well, and look what we do now. We're appalled by what we do. So on weekends we go to the Berries and the Braidwoods and the Bowrals, and we enjoy those places. But we certainly don't go to Campbelltown and West Dapto, even though that's the latest and best that we do. So we really have a serious problem. So it's my view that we go back to the future. We have to look at what's worked really well for centuries. The design of the best urban habitats for Homo sapiens that we're all culturally connected to and bonded with, I think, is the European model, not the American sprawl car-dependent model, but the European model. And that's where people rush to go and see these places. And I think we've got to look at trying to embrace the opportunity to do that in our regulatory structures. So there is a worldwide movement at the moment. It hasn't hit us so much, but this is the relocalization of society. And it's interesting, it's all about people wanting proximity to services. The trend towards these big regional, big box retail centres there's a big movement away from them now. They're declining, in part because of everyone's buying online, that's number one. But secondly, there's a movement away from those big regional centres. And part of the power of that is apparently driven by the cafe society that we tend to live in now. We like to go downtown and engage with people and see one another. So the ability to walk to shops and cafes, schools and parks, etc., in a local scene is a very powerful aspect of our desire. So if we look at what are the key elements to designing a new town and getting it to function well, the most important one from a sustainability point of view, from a well-functioning town point of view, is to have a range of weekly retail needs in a local area. Now that requires density near the centre, diverse housing choice, again near the centre. If you want a bigger block, you can go further out, and flexible zoning to accommodate the changes in land use over time, because economic forces change, and right now we're all stifled. If you're not in that zone, you really have to give up trying to rezone something to permit some land use change. Grid street layout, that's really the most important thing for legibility in a place, to find your way around, and it's the most attractive form and well-functioning form of urban layout. And traditional architecture, we love that traditional architecture, but modern architecture, although individual buildings might be okay, when you put them together you get a jumble of styles, and it doesn't necessarily give you a sense of any serious identity in a place. Footpath infrastructure is a key one. Community hall and cafes fronting a town square. I think that's the cornerstone of beautiful European towns, and it's very easy to do this, but it's not in the culture of our regulatory framework, and it's not in the culture of our industry as yet. So a quality new township would have a minimum of 3,000 people, relatively dense at the centre, with about 50% of residents within a 450 metre walk distance. And it's in that close proximity that we have our diversity. The physical infrastructure, these are pretty straightforward: road connections, sewer and water. I want to just bring in an element here relating to East Bowral and South Bowral. If you have a centre out there, it really will contribute to relieving traffic pressure in Bowral itself. because if you can provide those small go-to things that people need without having to travel into Bowral, if they can get them in a small IGA supermarket out in that area, it really does make a huge difference to the traffic generation in a place like Bowral. People have to come in and just get one or two little things and go out again. That all contributes to an already congested Bowral centre at times. Economic infrastructure, again, the traditional Main Street retail. The key is a local grocer of 1,000 metre floor space. If you have one that size and you've got 3,000 in the catchment, you'll have a range of goods at a price point that's competitive pricing, and therefore that will function well. And all of the suppliers like Metcash, they tell you that this is the formula and it does work. And social and service infrastructure, sites for schools and preschools, recreational areas. Diversity of dwellings is a key element in social vibrancy. Footpaths both sides of every street, town square and community hall. And this all leads to substantially lower transit costs per household. 50% reduction in carbon emissions from transit. That's in these new compact townships in the US. That's well researched and those figures are very clear. 80% of allotments east-west orientation. You can get your best passive energy efficiency quite effectively. Improve mental and physical health and significantly improve resident amenity when compared to sprawl. So Southern Highlands, we have 9% of dwellings that are other than freestanding homes. In New South Wales, 35%. So we do have a deficiency in smaller, more diverse housing. And this is the missing middle that we've often heard referred to. It's only 1 and 2 storey, but quite a diverse range of housing. And normally it comes in a little smaller and therefore it's more affordable. It doesn't have to be poorly designed. That's the Bowral South area, and I've just drawn a bit of a circle around that spot. That's where the more dense development would be, and with the town centre right near the corner. It'd be offset from the main street. But if you do conventional sprawl for 9,000 dwellings, you'll need 1,500 acres of your Greenfield land in this region. But if you do 9,000 dwellings in a compact township model, you can get down to 900 acres. So you would have saved 600 acres of the district's green space if you do this. This is a town that my wife and I built about 16, 17 years ago. This is the main street. But it shows you that you can, the selection of trees for a start is really critical. And the people who live here are really thrilled to be in here. This house, these houses here, 1 metre setback. And it's only 200 metre allotment with 1 metre setback. And it's not a disaster. People who live here have lived in sprawl circumstances before, and they've come here and they've said they've never had a better living environment. And very popular with the downsizers, say the 65 years and over. And these are terrace homes with rear lanes. This one here is a rear lane where with a Sydney builder, we developed apartments over 3 garages, and they're single bedders, 54 metres. We were surprised how popular they were, and we found out afterwards that most of the people who bought these were midlife divorcees, which was interesting. They didn't want to see a mower. They were resetting their lives, and this was a very valuable product for them. And in fact, the locals began to call it Heartbreak Lane. But life being what it is, it wasn't too long before it was called Heartmake Lane, as they were starting to get together in new relationships. It was rather interesting to see that. The ones up on the right, top right, that particular, we had a full line of those. They were very popular with the 65 pluses. And the lower one is a specifically designed multi-generational house. This is just in Berry, gives you an indication of what I think we can do. Really attractive places for pedestrians and to walk around it, but it's traditional architecture. It's really interesting. Chris Leinberger in the US, one of the leading urban economists, a fellow of the Brookings Institute, in a recent statement he said, speaking in Europe, he said 70 to 80% of all new housing in the US is now in walkable urban settings. So what does that mean? It's either new townships as an alternative to sprawl, or it is the revitalisation of small previously failed little centres in metro areas. And that's where most of it is happening. They're revitalising, relocalising, they're getting investment back in there again, and people only have to go down the street a little bit to get their services. So delivering quality urbanism, I think the most important hope I have here is that Council have adopted a set of exemplary principles. These are the ones they've adopted, but my anxiety is to implement this, to enable these to be developed. You need a new suite of regulations underneath these principles. And that's the primary concern I have. And I feel if the community at large, if they accept that this is going to happen, I'm sorry to give you the bad news, I think it's going to happen, then I think the community should be on the front foot, encouraging Council to write regulations that enable us to deliver a better quality urban outcome that's other than the conventional sprawl. So that's the key, new suite of regulations. And one of the problems is that our professionals are trained in the conventional at the universities and in their practice. Our consultants are steeped in the conventional. They focus on that and they know that can get them through the system. So this is a real challenge for Council, and I think Council needs support in this matter. I don't think they're going to be able to stop it under any circumstance because too much water's run under the bridge there. So this could become one of the most important urban developments in Australia for over a century. And I feel that these sort of places are much more complex, much more difficult to build, but I believe it can be done. It's being done in other places in the world. Thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you, Ray.